me start by asking you all, who has been to Vienna already? Hands up. Okay. Well, the rest of you, I can see you queuing tomorrow with me at the airport. What I will be speaking about today is the Vienna story. And yes, indeed, it is about how come Vienna became the world's most livable city, and perhaps most notably, how come it has remained at the top for many years in a row now. And actually, it's a story of major transformation, and there is a message behind it. And the message behind it, keep it please in the back of your minds while I will be presenting, is that sometimes big change is the result of many small things, if there is a plan behind it. And it can be done. It has been done, it can be done, it can be done anywhere, actually. So if I'm trying to do something here tonight, this is to inspire you. Now, supposedly, if I push this button, the slide changes, but it doesn't. Yes, it does. So, you may have heard, all of you, that, again, Vienna is being ranked regularly as the world's most livable city. So, according to MERSA, since 2010, every year in a row, and Monocle, and Forbes, and Economist, and whatnot. So again, this question is, how do we make it? And how have we managed to stay at the top for so long? Now, you may be skeptical about counting livability with points. And you should. I am. So in a couple of minutes, we will be also looking into what is livability, actually. But let's say, for the sake of now, let us just keep in mind something we must have been getting right in order to have made it. Now, Vienna, okay, I see now that this clicker and me are not going to be friends. Okay. That will be bad. Perhaps I'm pointing in the wrong direction. Can somebody help me? Please. Ah, yes. Okay, that makes life easier. So let's point. Okay, so how do we actually plan the livable city? What you see here, by the way, is the way this was done several years ago when I arrived in Vienna. So it had really a lot to do with plans. Nowadays, it's less about plans, it's more about strategies. And perhaps the second thing that has changed drastically is that there are women doing this as well. And I think, without trying to be offensive, it does make a difference, as we will see also in a couple of minutes. Now, looking into Vienna's historical assets, let's start with actually social housing. Now, Vienna is a city that builds upon a history of 100 years of social housing. And when I'm talking social housing, I mean high quality social housing. If you look into the historical buildings of social housing, these are municipally owned buildings in Vienna. They have really wonderful urban qualities. So they had vast inner yards, green inner yards. They had, by the way, swimming pools for the children. They had libraries, they had kindergartens, they had everything you need for everyday life. So this was not just about giving people a home. It was actually pieces of city that were created back then. And the principles of this time are the ones that we're using, actually transformed until today. In terms of figures, 62% of the Viennese nowadays live in either municipally owned or subsidized, hence social housing units, so 62%. The city invests more than half a billion, per year. And we have a very active land policy. I cannot get deeper into that. And this is the result of collaboration between the city and approximately 50 non-for-profit housing developers, so housing corporations. So the role of nonprofits here is also crucial. The city aims at 7,000 subsidized additional units every year. And in order to safeguard quality, there are competitions. So developers have to compete against each other for a piece of land and the subsidy that goes with it. And as you can see, the criteria are that the developments need to be diverse in architecture, they need to be inclusive, they need to be participatory, they need to be, of course, a robust business case, and they need to have high ecological properties. The images, I think, just give you an idea of the quality that we're talking about. And what is also very important to know is until today, social housing is targeting middle class. So it has no stigma. It is not poor people housing. It is not housing just for vulnerable groups. 75% of the Viennese population qualify for social housing. So you must imagine that in the meantime, a family of 4 can have a net annual income of well beyond 100,000 euros. So you imagine that this is, again, housing for literally almost everybody except for the really very rich. I have talked about the criteria for the competition, so we can skip this slide. Let's say that the quality, again, that comes out of it, this is an example, actually, of a project that I love that did not win the competition. And I always wonder, if they did not win the competition, what was it that won that competition? But it's just to give you an impression of the way this has been designed. Now, Vienna is an extremely green and blue city. 53%, meanwhile, of its overall area is green areas, and it keeps expanding it. And it is a city of, actually, it is the city of public transport. So we have one of the densest public transport networks that there are worldwide in a city this size. You never have to walk for longer than 3 minutes to get to the next station. You normally never have to wait for longer than 3 to 5 minutes, so this is also, of course, an asset. I'm showing you all this because all of this was there before I became Vice Mayor, right? So this is something that takes decades to grow and is the result of 100 years of smart people that have taken smart decisions. Example given, a very smart decision was to introduce the metro in the 70s, but to not abandon the tram, which is why we're where we are today. Now, this said, what transformation are we talking about? So, 10 lessons to share. And when I mean lessons, it's about approaches, it's about experience, it's about what we have gotten right and sometimes not. Again, nowadays, of course, strategies have replaced plans, so we have plans for just about everything, like almost every city in the world. And don't get me wrong, a city always needs plans. I said it in the beginning, if you don't have a plan, you're not getting anywhere. You just have an array of nice projects that somebody comes up with every now and then. On the other hand, plans in the end are coffee table books. So the point I'm trying to make here is, how do you bring plans to life? How do you translate them into action at the local level? And the city has a smart city strategy that I think is provides us a very good orientation as to what we are after. We said we want to be a city that provides maximum life quality to everybody, and not to just the few and exclusive who can afford everything. So we want to be a socially inclusive city, while consuming as little resources as possible by constant innovation. And that does not mean technical innovation. It means any kind. It means social innovation. It means actually putting people at the center of everything. And so here comes the point where I would like to ask you, what is actually life quality? I mean, politicians love talking about livability, and we forget to ask them what they mean. I mean a city that's good for children. And you may ask why, and my answer is because what we want for our children is what we want for ourselves. So we want our children to grow up in a healthy and safe environment. We want them to be able to move around freely and play. We want them to have access to nature, to be able to play with water, perhaps. All these things are good for us as well. We love them. So if we don't provide them at the heart of our cities, what happens is that young couples, when they know that the first child is arriving, may say, well, now we have to move to the suburbs and buy a little cottage so that our children can have a happy childhood. And more or less, this is a drastic image, but this is where they end up living, and this is where they spend the rest of their lives then. This is how I grew up in Athens, by the way. So trying to bring the kids to school, trying to access their working places, trying to do anything they need for everyday life. So we said no. We want to do it the other way around. We want to be a city that's good for children, because a city that's good for children is good for us all. It's good for every generation. And here's an image of what this can look like at the heart of the city. That is, by the way, Mariahilfer Straße. And this is an image of what it can look like in a new urban quarter. And mind you, this is a natural photo. So these are not actors that have been posing. That is the threefold strategy of Vienna in a nutshell. It is affordability, because if people can't afford to live in the city, they will have to move out. It is livability, as explained, and it is community, because you're not getting anywhere in implementation without community. Now, this is lesson number 2. If lesson number 1 was, what is livability? Lesson number 2 is using new urban quarters as an opportunity. Whenever we have a new development, a new piece of city, why on earth should we do it the same way as the city is already? Why shouldn't we use it as an opportunity for repair, for improvement, to the benefit not only of the people who will be living there, but actually of the entire vicinity? Now, in Vienna, we were in the very privileged position of disposing of several former railway areas, military areas, etc., in quite central parts of the city that are open for conversion now. You can see, actually, here that they are, all of them, quite centrally located. That's good news, because we don't need to spend so much money on infrastructure. It's already there. Now, using new urban quarters as an opportunity, you see the yellow arrow. This is what the images are from, and the green area that you see adjoining it is actually under construction and almost completed today. It's the former Northern Railway Station of Vienna. That is now a new urban quarter. But where the yellow arrow is pointing is actually an excellent example for for explaining our approach. Now, let me start with this image. That's from China. What's wrong with this here? Well, I say it's the horrible 3 M's. It's monotonous, it's monofunctional, and it's what I call monastic, because it has fences. And it turns, by the way, also, it doesn't turn its back to the city, but it's like to the side. And it has these fences. So it's not permeable. I hate fences. Actually, in Vienna, we hate fences. Administration, as a municipality. So we have a long fight against fences. And when we design new urban quarters, it's a struggle to make sure that they will be open. Why? Well, first of all, we design new urban quarters with a vast, accessible, open, green middle, always. We're talking hectares of green that will be 24/7 accessible for everybody, and high density at the edges with balconies. We tend to plant grown-up trees, and we have a focus on cycling and walking on the surface. We always have high-level public transport access within walking distance, and we do collective garages at the edges so that people will walk, let's say, the last meters to their front door. So these are some examples. We have a broad social mix, and we try to achieve also a mix of uses in new urban quarters. You can see also that we always try to introduce water elements. And we work together with collaborative housing projects. These are community magnets, as we have found out. These are social housing projects that are smaller in size and have been designed by the tenants themselves. They're extremely diverse and innovative, but the best part of it is because people have worked together 2 to 3 years to plan everything, they are already a community, and as soon as they arrive, they will organize new tenants around it. So we've talked about that. Saving money by not doing garages underneath every one of the buildings, but by doing collective garages at the edges, is given back to the people in form of. So it is not seldom the case that you have rooftop swimming pools in social housing developments in Vienna. And we put a strong focus on ground floors. We have mandatory ceiling heights on ground floors to make sure that we have shops and other social uses there. And we have changed, by the way, the building code a couple of years ago to make sure that we will have shops and cafes in ground floors so that we have real pieces of city and not pajama cities, right, where people just go back in order to sleep. We always introduce space for community life. This is an example of a community garden. And we always introduce multi-generation school campuses that will open up on the green space so that children can walk to school. I'll skip this, and all of this is done with mobile citizen involvement. So the tent that you see here is a mobile exhibition. It has an exhibition tile, and it actually forms a space where people come within and can get informed, but they can also be part of co-designing processes. So the Lego table that you see in the backdrop is not for children. It's actually for grown-ups to experiment with mass and space. This is actually always in public squares, in front of schools, in front of metro stations, so just go where the people are, and at times where the people were families, where younger families, where working people can be accessed. Because if you just do participation in a school building in the evening, well, most probably you will have retired, and I would say 90% retired men, which really makes a difference in the results of participatory processes. So we do several cultural events in order to activate local community and attract them to be part of the co-designing processes. So here's a summer cinema festival that was actually organized by local community, financed by the city, but it was part of a participatory process to design the new area. And you can see that the results may be at some times really surprising, because in this case we had several thousand people participating. We had an open ideas competition with more than 100 people participating. And the result was that the people asked actually for high density, even went for high rise, in order to preserve as much of the green space as possible, which is surprising, because Vienna is a place where anything beyond 2 to 3 stories is considered to be a so-called monster building. So if you have a process and you have the people saying, let's do it the other way around, then you understand how much sense it makes to involve them in these processes. Speaking of predictability, right? It's one of the best ways to produce it collectively. So here's the results of the competition. And without further ado, I will skip these slides because they're just examples of new urban quarters and how they're planned and how they look like when they're done. This is an example of when we do streets within a new urban quarter, we always look into them being shared space, straight from the beginning. If you're producing a new urban quarter, why do the grid? Why not free yourself from the grid? It's an opportunity to do it in a way where streets are places for life straight from the beginning, where cars can drive through. But this street is made for people and not for cars. So you can drive slowly and carefully through it, you can access your front door, you can do whatever you need to do, then you go to the collective garage. But this street can be used for many, many things, and specifically for everyday life. So, and here's the last example from a new urban quarter. We all know that when we have new urban quarters, it's always very difficult to get the shops going. So it takes ages, and then you have one or two, and the rest are empty. So we collaborated with a shopping mall operator, and they helped us design the shopping street. Because what we found out is that when you design a shopping street, there is very little knowledge by developers as to the different sizes and the interplay of shops, right? For retail and different kinds of shops. So they tend to make them all too large. And then this is one of the reasons why they're empty. So they advised us, you can see how they have shown us where to put what and in which size. And what's even more magical is that they then operated it as an open shopping mall, which meant that on day one when the new residents arrived, all shops were operated. And that makes a difference. Now, that brings me to number 3. Impact comes from networks. So, using new urban quarters as an opportunity, providing, example given, producing new, vast green spaces, connecting them with already existing green spaces via green boulevards, and you're in a different place. So the idea of how Vienna goes about this, and what I will be showing you in the next couple of minutes, has to do always with thousand-needle strategies, producing networks and nodes, and connecting them. Think of Vienna as a layer of networks. So we said we are already, thankfully, a 15-minute city. We would like to be a 5-minute city. That means we went for a polycentric strategy and said when transforming the already built city, we would like to have a center in every neighborhood. Now this center can be a small one. It can be a parklet. It can be a small square with shops. It can be, you name it. It can be in front of a school. But every neighborhood needs a heart that beats, needs a place to thrive, and it needs a place where you can meet each other and where community life can evolve. So the idea is to create such a center in every neighborhood, connect them with each other via walking in this case, and cycling, and thus actually develop the city further, not in terms of expansion, but in terms of internal development and transformation. So how do we do it? Transforming historical neighborhoods. This is an example of such a center that I've been talking about. Now, it's of course about making room for public space. There is a quote by Jane Jacobs that has been extremely influential to my thinking, at least, and that is that she once said that the outside of the buildings is the inside of the city. And I think that I have never heard anything that inspired me so much than this one sentence. Because yes, this is where the city materializes. I mean, where is the city? The city is out there. It's not in our living rooms, it's not in our offices, it's actually where we have a chance to come together. So, okay, renaissance of public space, but public space is a limited edition in cities. It's already occupied, and it's allocated to different uses. And as we all know, in our cities, it has been allocated to cars, most of it. By the way, not moving cars, but parking cars. I don't know what statistics are in Tirana. In Vienna, statistics are that in average a car is standing for 22 hours per day. So what do we want to have on our streets? Do we want to have cars and cars and cars, so actually metallic things, or do we want to have other things like trees and cafes and outdoor seating and, beautiful things that we all love. So if you want to reallocate space, there is one thing to know, and that is that public transport is the city's mobility backbone. So you better start investing in public transport, because this is also an opportunity of gaining space to relocate it to other uses. You can see that this is what it actually may tend to look like inside Vienna. So it's not like it's paradise and we've solved all of our problems. I have showed you this before, so that is a very good precondition for reallocating public space. What we also did was to expand parking space management to the entire surface of the city. So meanwhile in Vienna, in order to park your car in public space, you need to pay anywhere. And to take the money and to put it into public transport to make the annual card for public transport cheaper. So our annual ticket is at 365 euros per day. So for €1, per year. So for €1 per day, you can actually ride anywhere you want to, as often as you want to, and use one of the best systems that there are. And of course, it's a good deal. So the combination of making public transport cheaper plus expanding parking space management was a wow that actually changed the modal split towards cycling, walking, and public transport drastically. Now, we have invested a lot in cycling. I will rush us through here because so this is the cycling route network. It is right now at about 1,800 kilometers, and we keep actually closing the gaps, more or less. We invested in a cycling sharing scheme, and we encourage car sharing. Here you can see even cargo bike sharing, but at the heart of everything is walking. So we said we want to be a city made for walking, and thus we created a plan for a network of pedestrian boulevards that may be shared spaces, may be pedestrian zones, may be with very broad and shaded sidewalks, with seating along the way, with drinking water, with everything we need in order to be encouraged to go for long walks. And as I said before, these long walks are connecting public buildings, theaters, all kinds of institutions, schools, etc. So the idea is that you also use them to connect places where many people go to. The basics is a speed limit at 30 kilometers an hour within all residential areas. And then we said, rethink the street. And here we come to the 1,000 needles strategy. First of all, Mariahilfer Straße. This is Central Europe's longest shopping street. That is the way it used to look back in 2013. It was about 12,000 cars per day, but they would never drive through. They would just drive for 1 or 2 blocks looking for a place to park. And approximately 50,000 people per day on the sidewalks. On a weekend, it would be up to 250,000. Yet, 2/3, if not 4/5 of the space was occupied by cars, and pedestrians, were like this in the sidewalks. This is what it looks like today. And as you can imagine, most probably, it was a controversial project. We did do community and citizen involvement on site. We were there with the container for several weeks, and people could actually draw their ideas on this long table that you can see in the image. So we had thousands of people participating online and on the street, etc., just about everything and against everything. So this is a demonstration against cyclists with the most ugly picture of me that they could find in the internet. And it all actually culminated in a referendum. where we had to knock on 30,000 doors and tell specifically young families, if you want this place as a place for life, then please, you have to support us. The referendum ended with 53% in favor, so we were able to redo it. This is also another example of what it looks like today. And nowadays, 75% say if they were to vote for it, they would vote with a yes now. Now, the magic of it, very interesting. The magic of it is that it spreads. Once it was done, it started spreading throughout the entire city. This is an adjoining street. You can see the child play elements, right? This is what it looked like 2 years ago. So it just keeps going and going and going. And now we'll flip you through several examples of this 1,000 needle strategy, which is why I'm saying it can be that small, but if it's part of a plan of connecting centers, of creating centers in neighborhoods, of connecting them with walkable connections, of layering over it the green spaces network, then you're in a different place. So this is a very, very simple example in front of a school to make car drivers realize at least that here is a school. And here is one of the latest projects. This is from last summer. It is Vienna's first superblock that, not by coincidence, was created in front of a school. And now builds, by the way, the heart of an entire neighborhood. That is one of the most gray, by the way, in Vienna. So this is not a privileged area. And you can see this one. This is a street that was converted into shared space because the residents had started putting these plants on the sidewalks and doing vertical greening by themselves, and administration had to find them and ask them to move everything away because the sidewalks were so narrow and they were occupying the sidewalks, which by law is not okay. So the solution we found is, well, then who needs sidewalks? Take the sidewalks away, and then you have space for everything, so now it's a shared space. The magic about this is that while my hair grew gray when trying to pedestrianize Mariahilfer Straße, this was explained by citizens themselves to the others in the region, and there was no discussion at all, which opened my eyes, and I said, why don't we make this systemic? So the next thing that happened was we had real estate owners along this street who addressed the city and said, actually, our properties gain value every time you redesign a street. So we would be willing to pay to convert our street in a shared space. So they paid 50% of the costs, and this is what it looks like today. This, by the way, is a scheme that is expanding throughout Vienna right now. And it's not mandatory. They organize themselves, and it just goes on. So here's another example of such a street that has been converted with 50% real estate. And here's the network of cool spaces, because meanwhile, and while cities keep evolving and creating new plans, we have created a plan to mitigate heat islands. So as part of Vienna's heat mitigation plan, which is layered over the green spaces plan and the neighborhood centers plan, etc., we have now the cool spots plan. And again, for some reason, it's top down, but that is a lovely intervention. It is on one of the most ugly non-places in Vienna, Praterplatz, for those of you who know. The backdrop is the train station, the railway station, and the metro, and it was a place where nobody ever wanted to be. It was a place that you tend to cross as quickly as possible. And by just introducing this fountain, you can see children and families all the day there, plus, by the way, adults playing with water as soon as they emerge from the metro station. So here's an example of a terrace hanging over the metro and what it looks like. Temporary child summer play streets. By the way, we have reached number 9. that is embrace temporary action as well. Here's an example of a market organized by local community, where the street was then converted into shared space to make it easier to have the market there once a week. Another example of how simple it can be to transform a place in a hot summer day. This is being done regularly in front of metro stations when it is very hot and it's undone at night. And another example, and that brings me to number 10, embrace community action. Now, this is a very strong point I would like to make. I think that the most sustainable way to change the face of the city is to provide enablement for people to do it themselves. And this is where it all started. So these people here actually came up with the idea. They were living in a very gray street, very narrow, and they asked for permission to create this parklet in the space of 2 parking cars. And as soon as it was created, it became a magnet. Everybody wanted to see it. Everybody wanted to just walk by and have a chat. It was open for everybody to use. And the idea that emerged out of it was, why don't we introduce a community grant scheme where anybody who has an idea to do something in their own neighborhood, any idea, can have 4,000 euros as support, plus a prototype contract to use public space. And the only precondition is it needs to be open for use without having to pay entrance and without having to consume something. And it's more than 500 of them that have emerged in the last years. It is one of the most successful programs that we have ever had. And now think of it, in addition to the city redoing approximately 20 places per year, plus whatever is done here, plus all the temporary action, plus the new urban quarters, plus the neighborhood centers, and suddenly we understand why it was possible to transform the city within 10 years, like, exponentially, with an exponentially growing action. So here's another example, the long breakfast, all with the same 4,000 euros grant. Another example of it, a temporary farm for 2 years in the premises of an old abandoned factory. And you can see the home for the elderly and the kindergarten that were part of it. Social housing is there, by the way, that was temporary. And now we have reached the end and the takeaways and insights. I would say in a nutshell, this is Vienna's way to success. It's urbanity. And when I say urbanity, I mean it's about density. It's about not fearing density. It's about going after dense, thriving places full of people and not suburbs. So it's urbanity, it's density, centrality, affordability, livability, ownership of critical infrastructures, governance innovation, diversity, scale, networks, co-creation, community. It's all of it combined together. And then again, I think if you want to embark in lasting and wide-scale change, well, the fundamentals is clearly you need a plan and you need commitment to this plan. The operations part is you need a long-term approach. I think that the long-term commitment is most probably the most crucial part of it. And you need legal tools and coordinated action. And by the way, you need governance. What I did not mention is example given our approach to saying we want to create a new center in every neighborhood, we want to regenerate neighborhoods, is actually implemented also with the help of a scheme that is called neighborhood management offices, which are schemes of young architects and planners who are non-profits, who are financed by the city, and who have been operating in neighborhoods for decades now, and are the ones who are actually steering all these communication processes to make all these things possible. and you need momentum. And I think that one of the best ways there is momentum that may happen, as example given the Olympic Games in Paris, right? And then you can have grants and subsidies that can create momentum. But the best way to create momentum is to inspire the people to do something themselves. And this said, it's about thinking networks, thinking inclusion, thinking diversity, thinking out of the box, thinking differently, thinking bold. And that's the last one. And this one I have chosen because sometimes you just need to be shrewd. So, why go into every controversy? Sometimes you just need to use maintenance as an opportunity. What makes me crazy, example given in Athens, is that they redo streets for maintenance and they do them the same way that they were before. Or even worse, by the way, because they take cars out, they don't put trees, and this way they get even broader for cars to ride through at a higher speed, right? So, besides Vienna having taken the decision that every maintenance work will be scanned in terms of opportunities for broader sidewalks, additional greening, etc., in this case, we did something very simple. That was a bridge that had to be closed down for car traffic in order to be maintained. And so we closed it for car traffic, and we never reopened it. And sometimes you have to do it this way. This said, whatever way you choose, it's a good way, just do it. Thank you.